Okay, and we are live. I want to welcome everyone to another episode of ARCS Chat. Couple of quick technical notes. My name is Robin Bauer Kilgo. I will be floating around as your technical person. There is a slight delay as we go up on YouTube. So if you have a question for any of our panelists or any of our co-folks, just go ahead. It might be a few minutes till we answer it. We will be monitoring the chat box, so feel free to put your questions in there and we will take a look at it as things go on. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, ARCS, Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists. Whenever we do any of these sessions, you'll get a little indication saying that we're live and you can join in. And just a quick programming note, on May 14th, we're going to be doing a different type of panel, not an ARCS chat, but a really fun live panel with the ARCS Emergency Subcommittee, all about COOPs, continuity of operation plans. So May 14th, 2 p.m. Eastern, join us. And I'm going to go and hand the mic over to one of our other hosts right now.
And that'd be me. Welcome, everyone. Before we get started with introductions, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items with our listeners. Remember that ARCS has compiled a list of resources and materials relating to COVID-19. You can access this information on the ARCS website, as well as make recommendations to add materials and information via the submission button at the top of the page. Also, if you have missed an ARCS chat episode, if you're not, you can catch them on our YouTube page, as Robin pointed out, as well as subscribe and listen to the podcast wherever you find them on Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify. So without further ado, I'm super thrilled for this month's chat as we are honored with the presence of our guests, Jenny Matthiason and Kloe Rumsey from the C Word podcast. These talented individuals are conservators based in the UK, and they have just begun the 7th season of their show this spring, chatting about a wide range of topics relating to collections care. If you haven't already, go and give the C Word podcast a listen wherever you find podcasts. Jenny and Kloe, welcome to ARCS Chat.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having us.
So today we're going to kick off this month's chat by delving into all things May Day. And May Day can relate to a lot of different things. Historically, it's a celebration of the coming of spring. More relevant to us, of course, is the yearly call to action for emergency preparedness. AIC and FAIC, which are acronyms for the American Institute for Conservation and the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, continue a tradition in the US of dedicating May 1st as a day to prepare. For many of us in the eastern part of the country, that's a direct focus on preparing for hurricane season, which begins on June 1st and runs through November 30th. And if you're like me and come November 1st, you think you're done, you're not. You've got about 29 more days left in that season. So hold tight. Suffice it to say that this year will be like no other as we continue to climb out of a pandemic, but it's still important, if not more so, that we continue to prepare our institutions and collections for both the seen and unforeseen emergencies. So with that, as I mentioned, hurricanes are a big proponent of emergency preparedness planning in the US. What are some of the unique focal points of emergency preparedness in the UK and Europe?
Well, I suppose it's well worth remembering that we're in the UK, which is a tremendously soggy part of the world. So a lot of the things that we worry about are water-based things. So it's a lot of flooding and leaks and that sort of thing. That isn't to say that other things don't apply. We certainly have big storms as well. And across Europe, we have a tremendous amount of different things that can happen, you know, everything from earthquakes to hurricanes as well. So, you know, it's all sorts really. But in the UK, I think we're really quite focused on either fire or flooding, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think I'll add that I don't know how it is in the US, but quite a lot of our heritage buildings and museums are very old, and they all struggle with funding. So, you know, it might simply be that there's a blocked guttering that come, you know, February, it's blocked, it's still raining, it won't stop for another 2 or 3 months, and the maintenance hasn't been done to it. So I think it might, the water ingress thing isn't just the fact that it rains a hell of a lot, it's also that it takes its toll on the buildings as well.
Mm-hmm. I could definitely say that a lot in the US is not old in comparison to
relative.
yeah,
Relative,
in comparison to, especially in Florida, and Robin can probably speak to this as well. I don't think we have many wooden structures left in the state except for like a handful. And of course, when I think of like emergencies that happen in the UK, the ones you hear about, of course, are the very devastating fires that happen. And I think maybe some of that's due to the fact that those structures can tend to be made out of wood, and not a lot of that exists, at least in the southern part of the United States, because it just doesn't last.
Yeah,
or hasn't lasted.
I started out my early career doing archaeology, and I remember thinking I'd come across these like great ruins everywhere, and in Florida there's no ruins. Everything's underground because everything got wet and like got destroyed. So we definitely don't need to deal with that down here.
Although there is a monastery in Miami, if you know.
There is, and shouts out to St. Augustine, which is over in Jamestown. So
we've got that.
I suppose coming from because originally I'm from Sweden, which is a place that has a tremendous amount of buildings made out of wood. So in comparison, it seems to me that the UK is quite robust in that it's got a lot of stone and brick buildings. But, you know, that's not to say that still can't be gutted by fire, for example. So, you know, it is one of these things of, you know, sometimes accidents happen, and that's the kind of thing that we're trying to plan not for, but mitigate against. So,
well, I mean, to your point, the didn't they, or last week, they make a declaration that the fire at the National Museum of Brazil actually was the result of an air conditioner that caught on fire. Yeah. So again, it's a maintenance issue that can have such a disastrous effect, especially in a building that size.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy to think, isn't it?
Yeah. So.
Oh, that's surprising. I hadn't heard that. That's surprising and also very frustrating. But you kind of, we're talking about general maintenance here, things that you would, you know, hopefully do or have the funding to maintain to avoid simple things. What are some low cost practices that collections care professionals can implement that can help mitigate risk? One of the things I'm thinking of is I used to work at an institution that had a historic home, and we were fortunate enough to put in a fire suppression system, but in other institutions where they don't have that, oftentimes they would recommend like closing all the doors between the rooms to just delay the progress of fire, should that be a concern.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, obviously, if you are lucky to be having your emergency services around, you know, long before there's an emergency, then, you know, the fire departments and stuff like that, they're very happy to tell you about stuff like that. So it's always a really good idea to have a site visit by emergency crews and that sort of thing, because they can tell you some really valuable stuff. And that can be anything from, close these doors, or try not to keep paper in this particular bit, because, you know, like this might be where a fire could really, you know, take off and that sort of stuff. Like having someone around to just give you some pointers is actually a super duper good way of just preparing. And it, at least here, it definitely isn't something that costs. I mean, obviously you have to, you know, make an appointment, like these guys are busy, but it's a really, really good idea to have a site visit. It can really help you make a really, really good plan.
Yeah, and I'd say that in terms of actions that we ourselves can take sort of on a day-to-day basis, I'm quite a fan of just familiarizing yourself with the measures that you would have to take in the event of an emergency. So just, you know, this is the thing we're told to do anyway, obviously. Where are my fire extinguishers? Where are my stopcocks in the building? Where do I turn off the electricity if I had to dash into a building at 2 a.m. because, you know, there's a huge emergency? Just knowing where things are and knowing where blueprints are and stuff. Even if you're new to an institution, go around and have a look at where you might find everything. And it's all, and I mean, when we do these plans, we have all the information, but I mean, it plays on my mind a bit that I've not read my emergency plan for probably a year. And I don't remember where everything is, and I don't remember everyone's numbers, and they're not in my phone. So that's something that I can do easily to make it easy if I was to get a call in the middle of the night to just respond.
I mean, it might be a bit tricky to do now, although quite a fun exercise, actually, if you do it over Zoom or Skype or whatever it is that you use to communicate with your colleagues. I love tabletop exercises. They are the most fun ever. It is so much fun. Just have like one person think of a scenario with some flashcards or something that only they can see, and like then just have everyone sit there with their emergency plans and go, this is the scenario, this is what's happening. What do you do? You're first on site. And it's so much fun. If you make it obviously not a stressful situation, because sometimes, these sorts of exercises, they can be a bit, oh, what if I get it wrong? It's not about that. If the answer isn't easy to find in your emergency plan, then, you need to do something about that. And also, it's such a good way of A, getting to know your colleagues, and B, getting to know your plan. It's such a good way of finding snags as well. Because sometimes something you think is really obvious, it's like, it might be that, oh yeah, the gloves are in the conservation lab and the kit is here. And people go, how do I get into that room? I'm not sure I've ever been up there. So why would I know where that is? And it's like, that's a really good point. Maybe we need to make that clearer. I love exercises like that. They give me life.
Yeah,
All right, I'm going to make an open call now. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say real quick, with the tabletop exercises, the funnest thing on the earth to do is when you create your teams, take out the person who everyone looks to for answers. It's like the best thing you can do, because then you just kind of watch the cards crumble like around you. And if you take that person out, like, it's fascinating to watch like what happens. Like, sometimes it can be an operations person or a facilities person, and you just watch the things go. And also, I need a definition. What's a stopcock?
Oh, it's I didn't know that was a
I need a translator.
It is the tap, essentially the water tap to the building. It's usually in a basement.
Gotcha.
Or like under a sink or something.
Gotcha. Water shut off. Very unromantic how we call them.
I mean,
that's more descriptive though. You don't need a translator for that though.
I like that.
I'm gonna create a T-shirt with that on it. I wanted to say, like, this is a perfect opportunity to ask somebody to create a game that's comparable to maybe Cards Against Humanity for these tabletop exercises. So maybe Conservators Against Humanity.
Kenny, get on it with your drawings. Oh man.
Oh my God.
So yeah, you draw. Oh, okay. You got to take out the facilities person, and then you make this decision.
That is a really good idea.
I like
well, that certainly would make it fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So. Yeah, and then the chain of command, maybe we can incorporate them. It's like, oh, the director can't be reached right now. The second in command has to make the call, and you're that person. So,
dun, 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 dun.
It's fascinating to see, because there's always going to be like the alpha folks on your staff, right? The ones who jump in, and then it's also fun to watch them struggle with not jumping in for a good hour because they desperately have all the answers and they won't be allowed to talk.
But you make a good point though, Robin, because everybody should know what to do. Like your front of house staff, your visitor services, if there's an emergency happening, no matter what it may be, they need to know what their role is in it, and then what the bigger whole role of the institution is, so they can make decisions for themselves, for their team, if they are leading a team, to support their, however the hierarchy goes into play when you have an emergency, to be able to support those staff members as well. And we're always worrying and think about the collection, but if you have people in your building, human life and safety is also a very important factor as well.
We've got a great crew of people online on the chat, all the way from Los Angeles to London to Canada. So thank you everybody for joining us. So please send us your questions as they come up, and we're monitoring the chat. Thanks for chiming in.
Would this be a good time to talk about or ask about how do we feel about the non-emergency emergencies? Like I've gone into a room in this building, and it's full of mold, and it's probably been like that for 5 years. That's not it's raining in emergency. It's not a fire emergency, but it is oh no, I've got to deal with this and somehow move all my priorities around, even though it's not one of the traditional situations that you would be allowed to move your priorities around in.
I don't know. That's still an emergency though, isn't it?
You mean Amanda and I live in the world of mold in Florida. Like, it's literally everywhere.
That's the state's slogan.
It is world of mold. 2-1. Disney's going to do a whole thing.
Pest infestation would work as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's something we've talked about in different places, about how like we rate these threats, but they're all threats, right? They're all stuff that we have to deal with.
Absolutely.
So in a perfect world, you'd have an emergency plan that kind of like handled all this stuff. You know what I mean? But as I've often said in the past 2 months, and I never thought pandemic was going to be something we'd ever have to deal with. So, It is you handle it, I think, in a slightly different way though, when you're handling stuff that's more exactly what you said. The mold's been there for years. So it's like, when can you do it? When's the money to deal with it is the other question.
Exactly. Damage is occurring, but it's already half occurred already. And there's all these other things you've got to deal with.
Right, that may be more pressing. Like if you do have a pest infestation and you have it actively in a collection space or a display space, arguably that would take priority over a room that maybe no one has access to, but that is definitely in decline that needs addressing. I'm trying to think, because the way our emergency plan is set up, and I don't know if it varies from institution to institution, so chime in if you all have different experiences, but we've basically identified like the top 3 threats to our institution. Yet we've still included procedures for various emergencies. Like, for example, if there's like a hazard material spill, that emergency process is included in our EMP. But we also have like a whole separate section as to how we react in regards to a hurricane, which is, still an emergency, but something you can actually kind of plan for, which may not be the case in regards to like a tornado or an unforeseen water leak, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure if other people have that same experience or not with their emergency plans, and whether that's really a smart setup in general for an EMP.
It's varied because I've been at many different institutions, and also occasionally I will just help other places with their emergency plans and stuff, and it really varies. I mean, it's whatever works for you, really. I don't think there's a one size fits all for this sort of thing. Some places do where it's almost like a traffic light system. I mean, where there's it's like an amber kind of level and there's like a red level and like that sort of thing, where there are different grades of kind of emergencies, and like the emergency light would be something more like finding mold or that sort of thing. So it would still be encompassed in the plan, but it will be a bit more like, it's not all guns blazing, it's more of a light approach, but it still has a procedure. So I think it just depends on what kind of works for you. But I mean, they are all emergencies.
But as someone pointed out just now on the chat, that mold, for example, and same with like toxic chemicals, it's as much a health issue as it is an issue for the objects. So it's something that you have to deal with in a pretty timely manner, and without a doubt. And I guess you have to assess the severity of the problem first and foremost. But yeah, I mean, it definitely requires allocation of funds and immediate attention.
And different institutions will be used to different things as well. So if you've got hazardous materials and if you've got hazardous collection, for example, loads of asbestos or whatever, you're probably going to be more switched on to the idea of you could walk into the store tomorrow and find a huge chunk of asbestos that you hadn't found before. Or if you've got a history of a certain type of pest infestation, you're more likely to find it and be used to the idea.
That's true. And then I think you're all speaking to the same point, that like you could have a hazardous spill of some kind, but it maybe isn't a major emergency. It's more of a lighter approach because it's contained, no people are around it. Maybe it's not anywhere near collections, it's somewhere in like the utility room of an institution. So I like that approach, that you have like various grades of response and then still procedures in general as to how you would react to something. One of the things that I'm always worried about is we're in a city, our institution, and I'm always worried about something outside the museum that will happen that impacts us. Like maybe, actually this has happened before. We've had a crazy individual running down the street in St. Pete at night, swinging an axe. And like that brought on a whole SWAT team experience.
Oh God.
And like, granted it was 9 p.m. we didn't have, I don't know if they had an event happening, but we could, because we do events into the evenings, we're in a downtown location. So what do we do in some situation like that, where it's the activity that's happening is a bit out of your control, but it's still impacting you as well? I always think about we are so focused on weather related emergencies often, at least in Florida, that I worry about not planning for things like that, like active shooter situations or other things like that, which are very much a reality as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know plenty of institutions over here, they will certainly have, things like in case of bomb threats, that sort of thing,
Mhm.
what do you do? And I think with all of these things, even though they're very different emergencies, there's kind of a unified approach of kind of, even if it's a chemical spill or someone coming in and threatening staff or a fire, it's about getting the people safe first and then everything else. So it's kind of, it does follow a logical approach, even though they're very different scenarios. Like there is like kind of a red line there where you can kind of follow the same kind of base procedure, and then it branches out from that.
I'm
Right, and that's-
curious. Oh, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say that on some level, you're if you're planning just for the event, you'll not account for all the possible events, right? But if you're planning for, like, for example, this pandemic, nobody has ever said that they're planning for a pandemic, but most people will have plans for when you can't have access to the museum. How do you prepare the collection and prepare your staff for taking care of things from a distance, and how, whether it's foam trees and designated responsible people to make visits, etc. So on some level, it's really about planning for the situation and not the actual event, right? So if it is say a protest, like I used to do a lot of work for private collections in Latin America, in Venezuela, for example, with a huge high homicide rate and a tendency for protests and street closures and things like that. Museums were often sort of under siege. So, that was a fairly predictable and event, but that could be planned for example. So, and whose planning is similar to that of a pandemic, maybe not as long term, but no access to the museum and external threats are possible. So, I mean, I've seen other people talking about that as well. So, as no expert of.
I do feel there's
emergency
also a
planning.
flexibility that's necessary in the sort of senior management teams and things, because, I mean, for the most part, if we take this pandemic example, it wasn't a huge surprise that our museums had to close. We saw it coming, even if it was just a few days. The people that made the decisions, really, they were planning it for the days previous, so they were kind of getting used to the idea. If it's something like an axe attack or active shooter, is that the phrase, then it's a more kind of, I suppose it's a formula event. Okay, well, if this happens, then we could do this. If this happens, then we could do this. And if there's a flexibility to, agreeing, well, all right, we'll close the museum then, rather than having to argue that case, then that's important as well.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think with all the planning that we tend to do, there always has to be some level of flexibility, because like John said, you can't account for everything. And then at the end of the day, a plan is just a plan. It's meant to be massaged and changed and turned around to accommodate the situation at hand. I always admire people who can think really fast on their feet, because I'm an individual that has to plan, like literally has to write things down. That entire introduction was absolutely written down, pauses for laughs and jokes included, because I can't think on.
I have a piece of paper every time I do mine, so I can't say anything.
I'd rather just come across like I know what I'm doing, rather than necessarily know what
Oh
I'm
yeah,
doing.
preach.
Do we have any questions in the chat box yet, John?
No, I mean, people are chiming in, announcing themselves, but there's not really questions per se at this point. Yeah, but we've got a lot of people there. So
definitely share if there's anything specific or any scenarios you would like to throw at the panel. We can definitely throw that into the chat and work it out.
we actually just got
be.
one as soon as you said that. It's
Good.
from someone named Cynthia Murphy, who's asking how often you review your plans, and it actually, and I'll add to this that is that what everybody's doing now that they're working from home? So
Yeah.
So how often do you review your plans?
They should be.
Well, I'll toss that to Jenny and Kloe. What are the processes at your institutions?
I think we actually look at it annually, to be honest, and then we aim to have an exercise every 18 months, which it's kind of funny that they're not in tandem, but that's just how it is right now. But yeah, so ideally then the snags that we'll find at the exercise will go into the next revision, and feed into the next one, etc. And then I think it's a more frequent review just because, staff changes, and it might be that phone numbers have changed for something, or there's a new person in charge, and it just constantly needs to be updated with like the right people and stuff like that. So I think that's why the actual updating of it is more frequent than the necessarily exercises that we do with it. But yeah, so yeah, but we are definitely looking at it now because, we're going to throw in a pandemic one.
Who's in charge of calling that review and calling for the exercises?
So that kind of falls to the collections manager at the moment. And then, yeah, basically we're like a small team that'll kind of prop up all of that. Obviously everyone's on board. Everyone knows it's a great idea. Everyone's super happy to like do the exercises and all that. And yeah, so, but yeah, it's the collections manager right now.
Mm-hmm.
I say the same. It's roughly the same for my institution as well. And when you asked the question, I thought, oh God, I'm going to show myself up here because I don't remember how frequent they're checked. Is it 5 years? Is it 2 years? Oh no. But for the most part, that we've been revisiting it because people have changed, staff has changed, situations have changed, addresses even have changed. So we're always encouraged to keep on board with it. And, we've got copy in various places and stuff like that. And emergency kits and stuff, some things like, safety masks and stuff might go out of date, so they need to be checked as well. So I think the team of my museum is quite a small one as well. So for me, it's the head of collections and engagement and the director of the museum as well. So everyone does get involved. And again, because we're a small team, we'd all need to be in the know if something was to happen anyway. So everyone is involved.
Couple other questions that came in. One specifically for Amanda. You mentioned you had about 3 top plans for your to prepare for. What are your others?
Oh, outside of like the 3 main threats.
Yeah, the threats. Yeah.
Now I've got to slyly pull up my plan so I can look at it and tell you. I want to say that we have something in there for a bomb threat. We have something in there on how to handle hazardous material or like a pathogen. So if someone gets cut and there's bleeding, how to address that. I think we have something that has to do with like water leaks of some kind that's like separate from, a hurricane bringing water into the building, but just a genuine leak that's happening in the structure itself. I think those are some of the other big scenarios that are listed in our plan, but I can pull it up and.
The other question we had was, do you have any advice for collections that are held in offsite storage facilities where you might not have control over the access and the facility itself, but you are responsible for your collections held within?
Have conversations with the people who do control access. I guess it depends on what the arrangement is. I know that if we've had, well, whenever I've been in a situation where that's been the case, I've had to liaise with the people who are in charge of the building, and just make sure that I know who the caretakers are, or I know who can give access, even if it's the middle of the night. And sometimes that can be an awkward process because people don't always want to tell you that. They don't want you ringing in the middle of the night. But at the same time, so I think try to open up dialogues if you can. And also I'd be curious to see if the overall facility has some sort of emergency plan as well. It might be that you could look at that together, because you want people to take into consideration your needs as well.
And ask them how often they're updating it as well.
Yeah.
So, and if calling you or your representative from your collection is part of that. So at what point they do call you and let you know that there's a problem.
Yeah.
So
have they already gone in then and like done stuff, or is it?
I worked in a facility that well, I worked for a collection that kept their stuff in a facility. And, I knew that, if the temperature fluctuated outside of the parameters that we gave them, that, they would get a call in the middle of the night and they would go and take care of it, but they wouldn't call me, even though I was the point person. But I don't need to be called for that per se. But if, water is pouring through from the roof, then I want to know about it.
Mm.
So what's the threshold?
Yeah, it's worth having that conversation.
I think it's interesting listening to everyone about the responsibility of others. It's a great question, because I think people always assume, and maybe even we sometimes assume, that if you have a collection store and it's off-site, then it's your building and it's your, it's under your control and all of this. But mine certainly isn't, Jenny's isn't, and it sounds like everyone is in the same situation of, we have the responsibility, but we don't have the control necessarily. So communication is absolutely key, isn't it? And knowing what their protocols are, knowing how often they're checked and stuff, is such a common issue. I hadn't thought of it before, actually.
I think another thing we have to think about too is really when I've helped with emergency plans with any of these things, I've become very good friends with the facilities people, because you need to have a team approach when you build these plans. I know I've worked at places where basically we had almost 2 parallel plans working. The facilities had a plan and we had a plan, and we worked alongside each other, because I knew with certain things, especially oversized things, sometimes I'd have to have the facilities guys come help us, right? Just because, especially hurricane prep is a good example when we had to move big objects, but also just being in good communications with those guys, because they'll, you both are worried about the either the institution or your collections or whatever, but they're going to have a breadth of knowledge that you won't have, and you'll have a breadth of knowledge they won't have. So being able to work alongside those folks is always really helpful, and they're just good people to be friends with anyway, because they usually have really good stories and know where to eat too. So I learned
Number one
important
thing,
especially when you're offsite, if you're in a spot that you don't know, they'll be like, well, there's a really good place, and it's like, awesome.
Oh yeah.
So
it's going to be down some alley you've never seen before, so you want to know about it.
Exactly. So, but it's good to have that communication. You don't want to be in a silo of just collections. You want to know kind of what's going on in the facilities and what's happening. And like I said, they might have access to pallet jacks and stuff to help you move stuff.
Oscillating fans, things like that.
So that's something I always try to keep in mind as well.
We have a couple other questions coming in. The first one is, would it be acceptable to ask to see their emergency plan where you're deciding to store?
Oh yeah.
I would think, you would have to ask that.
Absolutely. I kind of feel like that's, if you're going to move in somewhere, you definitely should.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that different from like requesting a facilities report if you're going to, if someone's trying to borrow something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. You shouldn't feel that touchy about it.
Yeah. The other question was, can you name any other staff who are involved in your EMP review at your institutions?
Oh, easily visitor services. So whoever is in charge of front of house and all of that and the facilities, they're involved. For us, basically the director is as well. And then me as the conservator, other collection staff, also whoever's in charge of education and outreach, because honestly, it's going to have an impact on them as well. So, it's kind of everyone. Oh my God, we have an additional member.
Yay!
Hi.
Working from home.
Welcome to ArcChat.
Absolutely losing it. Hi.
This is bad. It's like when the dog comes into the background of a Zoom
Totally.
meeting, and I'm like, I've lost all
amazing.
interest in anything we're talking about.
It's amazing.
As someone who has worked from home for 7 years now, 8 years, I love how like now it's cool to have your kids and animals walk through. Because before I would be like, stay away. Now I'm just like, awesome. Come on in.
It's fine.
So, anyway.
She had a splinter. I'm glad she
Oh
came
no.
Usually don't.
Massive.
You had
amount
the
of
answers
sympathy.
today, John.
Yeah, right. Of all times, right? So,
I do want to quickly hop back, not to cut you off, Jenny, but
No.
for the question that was asking if it's appropriate to ask the facility what measures they have in place, you could also offer to just send them. It might be a little daunting, but you could send them the AAM General Facilities Report. The UK has their own documents that they also require lenders to fill out. They can be a little heavy, but it's a good starting point if you just need to know, like, oh, do you have a fire suppression system? Is it this or this? Do you have like an alarm system? Is it this or this? Who's the first person you call? Who has keys? That's a great template to start from too, if you feel like you're, going from ground zero.
Yeah.
Just want to throw that in there.
Honestly, a lot of the time you probably want to know those things for things like insurance purposes and stuff anyway. So it's actually kind of just a good thing to communicate about.
Another question, this one from Vastari over in the UK. Is there a role for external advisors in this, such as insurance professionals, surveyors, or independent consultants?
I mean, I suppose sometimes we'll have like external training and stuff like that, and they'll just have someone else's input. Sometimes, people, I know for a while somewhere else I worked, we definitely had some people come around from what I guess I'll call a salvage company who help museums salvage objects after a disaster, and they came and gave us some talks and stuff like that. So I mean, consultants can certainly be involved in some fashion, even if it's just giving people training, more knowledge. Yeah, I don't see why not.
There are experts as well who are really keen to share their knowledge as well. I'm thinking of a man whose name I have no memory of, and I'm really sorry. He's an expert. I know, sorry. He's an expert in museum security. Jenny, you might know, maybe. He's definitely UK based. He's very
I know the face,
famous. Exactly, yeah. And he basically does visits of institutions, and like in a sort of heist film, will go around and go, well, a thief could get in there, somebody could get in there, that's this far away from an alarm, so this could happen, and this case is like this, and that case is like that. And people who see, and I guess it's the same way with fire safety professionals as well.
Definitely.
They make the connections that you might not make, and then they can give advice at, I would hope, different levels of expense as well. So don't be afraid to let people, if you've got funding to have consultants come in to have a look, don't be afraid of that, because I would hope that they would give you like a scale of money to spend, essentially, or some ideas that would be costless.
I suppose it is worth saying that it's like, it can be a really good idea to have like an external consultant do something like run your tabletop exercise or something. I mean, yes, that's cost, but because it's an outsider, they will ask questions that you have never thought about, and that can be really valuable. It depends on budget and all that stuff, but like, yeah, you should definitely ask for help from the outside. Like, it shouldn't all be in the organization if you can manage it. And I know that that's like comes with a price tag and hassle and all that, but it is worth having external input.
I think that external input doesn't have to even happen every year. It could happen, once as a way of, updating your plan, maybe every 5 years or something like that. And just to make, and then it's a big predictable, budgetable cost. Likewise, I would think that our insurance agents would have a lot to say about how we store the collection, where we store it, etc. I mean, I know many storage facilities don't get built unless the insurance agent says, this is a safe site, it's cleared of floods and flight paths, etc. So I would think that discussing that with your insurance providers is super important as well. So
I was just going to add that when we renewed our insurance this year, they required me to provide them with a facilities report of our building, anywhere we have artwork. We don't keep collection objects at our offsite facility. We keep other things there. But back 2 chats ago, or our last chat, when we were interviewing Huntington T. Block and DeWitt insurance providers.
Stern,
thank you. They mentioned, I mean, like, you pay for that service, you have that coverage, pick up the phone and call your broker. Like, what would they recommend? What would they say? What different scenarios? I've always found mine to be very helpful, but I don't always think to call them and ask for their input. And you're already a client, and it makes sense to do it. And the other thing, outside of like having your local fire agency or your local police force come through, meet them, get to know them, get them familiar with your building and their insight. But if you have couriers that come through your institution, this might sound bad, I don't mean to pillage for free advice from your colleague, but if someone asked me for my input, I would be over the moon to share my knowledge with them that could be relevant. And if, I remember working with a colleague who had really fantastic rigging experience. We were about to install a gallery that had a lot of large bronze sculptures, and we didn't really rig that much. We did paintings for the most part. He was more than happy to share his insight with us. I mean, it could be the same if you're like, look, I've got this odd storage space. I'm always worried about, preparing for an emergency. What do you see when you see this? It might be an opportunity there to gain some insight you might not have had before, if they're willing to share it, of course.
Yeah, and same, there's no harm in having any, someone else from another institution looking over you can do a swap, look over each other's emergency plans, see if there's anything that you cover but they don't, or vice versa. If there's anything that you haven't thought about, could just be worth doing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan and advocate of pillaging for free advice. I think we're not just these sort of professional institutions that follow all the rules and we're all shiny and everything. We're also a community, and even though some of us are tiny, moneyless institutions, and some of us are huge, national, like all the funding institutions, it doesn't mean that the individuals sort of in the wealthy museums kind of cover all the information and knowledge and stuff, and everyone moves around so much in this sector all over the world that we're going to know people. We will have heard of this person who's heard of this person. And so I think at the C Word we're always very keen on just ask people. Don't worry about seeming unprofessional by emailing someone and saying this is happening and I'm freaking out, help me. Because we all deal with the same stuff every day. So, and
I'm always keen to just drop everything and help someone who says they need help, even if I'm working on something for my boss. Like, no, I can pause that, but let me answer this one colleague's question because I have an answer that might help them. I'm a big
people are often kinder than you think, so it's worth a go.
Exactly, yeah.
And I love form swap. I mean, we have that. AAM certainly offers that. I think ARCS does too, Robin. We have a forum.
We have a document exchange. I was just going to say, I've been doing museum work since for 15, 16 years now. And I don't think I've ever created a policy or form from scratch. I have stolen it from everyone when I have done stuff, because that's what we do, right? And that's fine. That's part of this community. And I think that's a great thing about it is, we have such great sources out there and stuff that we can steal from and beg, borrow. And like you guys were saying, like, I'm a registrar / collections person. I love talking to conservators because all of a sudden, like, your breadth of knowledge is like so much deeper than what you had before. So, it's always been my experience too. But yeah, don't create from scratch. There's examples of everything like out there. And hey, if you created the new one, then you get to be the starter for the endless line of beg, borrowing, and stealing.
We'll name the document after you.
Exactly. Exactly.
We got another question in, speaking of pillaging, do you have any recommended resources or templates that people can reference when making their EMP, especially a template that covers more contemporary issues? I guess AAM is a good place to start. Is that correct?
That's D-Plan, which is an older thing, but it's online. It's a template to create a disaster plan that you can just plug in your information and it spits one out eventually. CASA has one too. The Council of State Archivists has a template I think you can use for emergency plans, at least stateside. Like I said, I've stolen a lot of emergency plans from people and just cobbled together new ones. So that's happened quite a lot. Do you guys what's your big source for emergency planning over in the UK? Like, what's the
Does UK Registrar Group have any of this stuff? Do you know?
Honestly, I don't know, but I would always go to the Collections Trust, which is kind of a centralized kind of thing for us. So I would go there. I'd check what the Museums Association has as well. And ultimately for some things, ICON also has. So that's our conservation organization, sometimes also has stuff on their website. So it's worth hunting around the kind of those usual places and see who has good templates and stuff like that. I'm a great fan of cobbling as well, so I don't think I've ever gone with a template. I've just had like 5 plans, then merged them and then edited them and then
Yeah.
And then
Same here.
Frankenstein something, and then it works.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, and actually you'll hear about this more next week during the COOP live panel discussion. But like, these documents are supposed to be living documents. So we say beg, borrow, and steal, but you're not supposed to just like copy it. It's not plagiarism. Don't copy it, put your name on it, and be like, done. You need to still go through it and make sure it's going to apply to your institution. That's something to really think about as well when you're building these.
And I would also add that, at least in the US, and maybe you can speak more to this, Robin, because I think you have experience with working with the Connecting to Collections community. And they've done webinars, and they've done like a whole process of like, this quarter we're doing a collections management policy, this quarter we're starting emergency preparedness policies. And I think that was Florida based. I don't know if that was throughout the entire US.
It depends. You're going to make me wear my other hat for a little bit.
Sorry.
I do work for Connecting to Collections Care, which is an FAIC program. You do coursework. We don't have any courses yet this year, but yeah, you'll see featured ideas going throughout the year and a strain of things all kind of following each other as we come up with the planning. So that is something you'll see often. And obviously, right now is May, so it is May Day, and we'll talk about that more, I think, in a bit. But like, that's right now, we really talk about preparedness and making sure you have emergency plans. And there, for a little bit, we were like, do we have to do this? Because we're like literally in an emergency right now. Like what
at a time.
This is day-to-day life. But at the same time, you don't want to stop it, right? Because like when this COVID stuff started happening, someone on one of these panels had the good question of, okay, COVID's happening, none of us are there. What happens if a link starts now? Like if your thing gets flooded. And I know here in Florida, we're thinking like, okay, COVID's almost done. Oh my God, there's hurricane season. Like literally, like right.
There was no break this year.
No break. So this is stuff it's unfortunately should just be part of your day-to-day operational stuff. And I think that's something you have to think about when you're building these plans, is it should become part of every day. It shouldn't be an unusual thing. You should kind of have this emergency thing happening in the back of your head all the time. So try to have a good night's sleep and
On that happy note.
So.
Well, I do want to, that's a beautiful segue into COVID-19 and emergency preparedness. But before we get there, I did want to touch on salvage a little bit, because I feel like we often talk about preparing and planning and prep, but do we often talk about recovery and salvage? And that is still a very important part, especially if you experience an emergency firsthand. So I'm curious, at least from a conservator's point of view, what are some of the immediate actions that professionals can take to help ensure a successful salvage operation?
Well, that's another thing that you need to plan for. So again, loads of planning goes into it. My favorite thing about running salvage courses, for lack of a better word, where we just get stuff wet. That's not real museum stuff, but that's real enough. And then people have to try to dry them out, is that it takes an enormous amount of space. It takes up so much more space than you ever thought you could even imagine from a bucket of stuff. So if that's going to be a whole gallery or like a whole store or something, you can need so much space. And it's all about like starting conversations way before you ever have to worry about anything like this. Like, right, well, where's the football pitch that I can borrow? Or like, where's like a warehouse that I can pinch for a while we try to dry out our objects. It's like all of the kind of planning that needs to go into that. I mean, that's stuff that you can do anytime. And again, it's about asking questions and starting relationships with people that you may not normally talk to. Like, it might be that you might be part of a bigger organization and they might have a warehouse or a disused building that's secure enough that you can use it for like drying out stuff whilst salvage is ongoing and stuff like that. So it's conversations to have. Those are like definitely the things that people should be doing if they haven't already, because you're gonna need to put that somewhere.
I'm a big fan of I saw one where I did some training once, and the thing that came back from it was having a checklist of things to do that is available and around. So in the event of an emergency, you're not relying on your brain. You're not relying on leafing through your huge emergency plan. You've got turn off your, I can't remember the name for the stopcock. And it was a really simple water
Water
shut off.
valve,
water
like the
shut
water
off.
shut off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Do this, turn off the electricity, do that,
best name ever.
you know, empty the building, do all of these things, because you will mind blank in a situation like that. I've never had to respond to an emergency before.
And also, it might not be you. You might not be anywhere near
Yeah,
it. You know?
yeah,
Like, you need
exactly.
anyone
Yeah.
to be able to follow those. So
Yeah, exactly. And my other thing actually was something that I thought of when we were talking about involving visitor services and other members of staff. We've actually, for general interest as well as emergency preparedness, I've done quite a lot of object handling training with our visitor services team and everyone in the museum actually. It's not so that they can then run off and go and do handle stuff, and if they don't have any need to, it's that now I know that in the event of an emergency, if I'm not contactable or if someone else is closer, then I trust them. Essentially, they can do it. We're not in the building at the moment, so my colleague and I are furloughed, so we're not allowed to work essentially because the job retention scheme, etc. The people who aren't furloughed are the visitor services, and in the event of an emergency, we would go, obviously, but they're the ones that are checking the building. They are the ones that would move open display objects immediately if it was safe to do so, if there was something, if they were being rained in on, and we trust them to do that because they've had that training and they've got the confidence. They've done handling in front of us. They know processes and stuff. So immediately having loads of people that you can trust and who feel confident to safely handle stuff.
It's a really good point, because in a salvage operation, it's not like you're not going to be able to do a whole gallery. Like that's not a thing. You're going to have help. And if you've already given people a bit of a primer in how they can handle things, and that's really great, which is another reason why I love getting stuff soggy and then having people try to handle that, because they handle very differently when they're wet as opposed to when they're dry. So that's just a really fun exercise to do.
You can add it to the tabletops, right?
Yes. It's slightly more involved.
Yeah. But it's true. I mean, one of the things about our plan that I think is really comprehensive, but I would like to change, is salvage. Like if you're dealing with wet paper objects, this is what you do. But it's written in paragraph style. What I want to do is make it into a chart or a bullet point, because there's no way that I'm gonna sit there and I can barely read a paragraph as it is and pay attention. So I'm not gonna be able to do it in an emergency situation. Yeah. And to your other point, I like to write things as if the individual reading it has no context, right? They're not a professional, like a collections care professional. They need a little bit more information to understand what they're going to do. So I try and write things so it's comprehensible to anybody coming off the street, because that's the way it'll need to be in an emergency, for you to delegate it out to somebody else, or for you to do it yourself if you are overwhelmed with a lot, which you would be if you're in a salvage operation.
Yeah, definitely.
While I remember it, the Museum of London, I'm pretty sure this is correct, the Museum of London has some really good online resources for object handling and emergency preparedness. And one of my favorite possessions is a thing that I got free from one of these courses, and it's an open out pamphlet thing, sort of concertinas out, and there's loads of different squares with, if you're dealing with photography, what do you do? If you're dealing with ceramics, what do you do? And I am an objects conservator, and I genuinely, if someone asks me, I go and look at the thing, because then you know that you've not forgotten anything when you're saying, okay, so you need to do this to books, but not this, and all of that. So it's not, I think, really breaking it down is one of the best things to do, and
Absolutely.
posters and, online courses and stuff. I'm pretty sure it's Museum of London.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where I put my old salvage wheel, which is the thing produced by.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Salvage wheel.
The salvage wheel.
It's in the house somewhere.
A good follow-up question to the salvage discussion, which is, how do you deal with staff after an event and after salvage, in terms of, for example, trauma and
I would,
Do you-
right. So controversially, I always say that it's people first, not objects. Everyone's always like, you're a conservative, you're going to be about the objects. And like, no. Make sure everyone has a cup of tea and a blanket. That stuff can wait. Don't worry. I mean, worry a little bit, but that's only a little bit. Like, the people are more important. It's a really good point. And something that I think a lot of emergency plans sometimes leaves out is that you do need someone to look after people during the emergency and after the emergency. So you do need to think about those things as well. And that can literally be a designated person who makes sure food arrives at the like headquarters, wherever you're based, wherever people are convening during the emergency. Make sure people are fed, make sure people are watered, make sure they're warm enough, make sure they take breaks. There should always be a designated person for that. And that person can then also help liaise with people afterwards and put them in contact with the right people. That can be, counselors, whatever you've got. It really will depend on what kind of emergency you've had, but it's so important to look after your people. Like, yeah, there's stuff, and the stuff is important, but the people, yeah, that's going to take more than Paraloid to fix. So maybe look after them.
Yeah.
Well, Danielle Bennett, who's the president of ARCS, she works in one of the Smithsonian institutions, and obviously the Smithsonian is gargantuan, and she's one of, if not the point person for exactly what you're discussing. Like, staff can call in and ask for counseling help. They can ask for what's the latest, what do we need to be worried about, etc. But it's a major responsibility. But yeah, it is that exact thing that a point person to get either correct information about, because obviously there's a lot of misinformation, or just to get mental health help. So
look after your people. It's important.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear from anyone who has experienced one of the really catastrophic emergency situations like the fire, or any of these, massive flood, massive fire, to hear how that actually feels. I know that might be a sad conversation, but how it actually feels to see what you're responsible for being
and also
severely
what kind of
damaged.
support you either received or you wanted to receive.
Yeah.
That's possibly something to learn from.
Are you directing that question at a certain company in the UK that had a major fire? No.
Not specifically.
I mean,
That's just a happy coincidence.
What comes to mind for me is the Glasgow School of Art, because that had two fires, which was very unfortunate. And yeah, then I don't know if you guys know this, but we had some very interesting flooding in November. So just the north of England was very badly hit by flooding, just in general. So there were a lot of like really badly hit museums across the north, for sure. So I mean, people will certainly have had very traumatizing times, but I hope those people were supported, and if they were, I'd love to know how, because that's a good thing to learn from. That's another thing that people should probably share at conferences and webinars and all sorts of things that we do about these things. Like, what is a good way of supporting people after an emergency, and what should we all be doing? Because actually that's not super obvious sometimes.
I think I've been to lots of, especially with where I live, I've been to plenty of things showing how institutions deal with hurricane and hurricane disasters and kind of how their institutions reopen. But you're absolutely right. That human factor, that people factor, is not discussed as much beyond us sitting at the bar after the conference. Trading horror stories of just, I had to do this. And then I walked in my institution and it was flooded and all the stuff that we had just put out got destroyed. You know what I mean? Like that. So I think, and hopefully through what we're experiencing right now, people will share those stories more on how they're kind of dealing with everything related to this. So
I hope there's not an element of shame where people don't want to discuss what happened to their institution because it was in a negative way, or they're not allowed to discuss it because it paints the institution in a negative light. If they somehow missed something that caused extreme damage. I don't know. I'm just throwing this out there because it seems like that could be a possibility.
I mean, and I suppose also adding to that, like also no shame in, much like there's no shame in talking about mental health, there's no shame in saying that, I completely froze up. Like, that doesn't make you a bad museum professional. Everyone reacts differently in an emergency. I've had times where, I've reacted okay-ish in an emergency, and times when I've reacted very badly and just gone, which, isn't great, but that doesn't make me a rubbish conservator, and it doesn't, whoever you are out there, doesn't make you a rubbish museum professional. Everyone reacts differently, and it's not even consistent. So, if you had a bad time, don't be afraid to talk about it, because it's okay.
We had one more question, and that was, how often would you recommend that you do drills, both announced and unannounced?
So we aim to do them every 18 months, but those are announced. I don't know what a good recommendation is for unannounced. I suppose it depends on how big a drill we're talking about.
I was about to say that. How disruptive will it be to the normal running of the museum?
Right.
Do you have to get the general public involved? Do you have to take anything out of the museum? Do you have to, what are we talking about, I suppose?
Because I think a lot of people get very excited about the notion of doing like an unannounced one, like a really big one, where it's like nobody gets to go inside and nothing's on as usual. And then people go, but what about school groups? And what about that wedding that we're doing? And what about, oh wait, yeah, actually this is a terrible idea. And there's a delivery coming out. Oh, this is going to take a while. It's not going to be unannounced at all. It's like, yeah. So it depends on how big a drill you're thinking of doing.
This actually sounds like a question for an outside consultant. If maybe it's something you do on your Monday that you're closed every week or whatever,
Yeah.
But even still, like, you have a situation and everyone's off and they're, away for the weekend or what have you. And I mean, I guess that is the reality of the situation anyway.
Yeah.
So,
I think the fact that you would just to plan a drill, to make sure you have one, to make sure your staff is familiar with it, that right then and there is enough, because everyone will be familiar with it. And even if it's something simple, like this is just a fire drill, we're pulling out all of our fire alarms, we'll go off and we'll do that, and then we'll come back in. I mean, because that's a very, like, we did that all the time in school, at least from my experience, but I have done it maybe 4 times in my professional experience. And I certainly wish we could do it more. And if you are going to plan something more elaborate, that's more involved, like my prior institution, they did a whole SWAT rundown, like an active shooter was on campus, but they did it between the hours of like 8 and 9, before any public was there. Staff was informed ahead of time, and we were told like not to come in until 9 to just avoid, it's a little traumatizing when you're not used to seeing somebody with like an automatic weapon running around in full military or police garb. If you're not used to that, it can be a little daunting. Probably not the way you want to start your day.
Imagine if that's unannounced. Imagine the trauma there. You show up and
I think that's one of those deals, though, that you need to make it part of your planning cycle, to have some of these, again, a safe way, exactly what you said, like before hours, after hours. And I worked at an institution one time that we had to shut down due to a mold remediation project. Like we had to shut down the whole facility. So that was the time that we said, hey, you know what? We're going to take down all the mannequins in the museum, and we're going to see how long it's going to take us to do, because for hurricane, you would do that. So we kind of layered we had an emergency parfait. We layered the emergency on top of each other, where we were dealing with an emergency, but we were like, well, this is a good time, because we weren't a facility that would close like often. We didn't have the Monday off to do cleaning. Like we were open all the time. So we were like, well, heck, we're closed. Let's go ahead and pull down this place and like see how long it takes us, and how much of a prep we have and stuff. So I think the important thing is to build a culture where you can do those kind of things, and that you don't get answered with, oh, but we're going to lose this, and this. It's like, I know, but we got to do some of this stuff to prepare ourselves for emergencies and when they happen. And I do think that's something important to learn from this COVID thing, is that, no one planned for this, obviously. And this shows you that sometimes emergencies will just pop up, and you got to just deal with them, you know what I mean? And see how you can handle it. So do those run-throughs if you can. And now we can all talk about how we need more funding for emergency planning, because everyone has experienced this emergency. So I like to think about that as well.
Have you heard the conspiracies that this COVID-19 thing is just a big test?
A
I've heard all
worldwide
sorts of
test.
One heck of a
conspiracies.
test.
Yeah. So anyway, just gonna drop that nugget.
Let that simmer for a while. Well, it's been just past an hour, so we probably should start wrapping it up. But I did promise we talk about COVID-19 a little bit and how it's impacted emergency preparedness. So I'm curious to know what you all think might be some of the challenges institutions and professionals might face in the coming year in terms of implementing their emergency response and contingencies that they should be aware of preparing for in light of the fact that we are all dealing with like a global health crisis.
Well, something that's come up in conversations with other museum professionals over here has definitely been that people worry about staff availability. Like, is everyone going to be available in terms of, are they going to be healthy? Are they going to be okay to stop shielding or isolating? Because, you know, if you have a long-term health condition here, you know, you're not supposed to come in, basically. You know, so it's all these sorts of considerations of how available will people be? And once they're on site, can you still keep a safe distance? Can you still get the job done, even with people trying to keep distance and all that stuff? So that's been one that's come up a lot in terms of like casual conversations with other museum professionals, for sure. Not sure how to best mitigate for that one, other than just keep everyone's number on hand and keep using your phone tree in whatever way you can, because hopefully you will be able to get enough people for it to be a safe situation.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. Yeah, make sure you're aware of people's individual situations. Are they who can afford to get it the easiest, essentially, and then who shouldn't at all be attending anything, health conditions wise. I think it would be a good idea to be aware of how the key workers. I don't know if that's a phrase that's used in the States, isn't it? Keyword, yeah.
Essential.
Essential.
Yeah. Okay. Be aware of how the essential and key workers do manage, because obviously people who are working in shops, people who are working all over the place, they still have to do things. They won't be able to keep 2 meters apart at all times, because that's not how life works. So they will probably have safety procedures as well. And if we familiarize ourselves with how they manage to stay safe, or stay safe as possible, then that's a good idea.
Also, I've heard people suggest quite, brilliantly that now might be a good time to make friends with other organizations around you, because it might be, if you're short-staffed, that organizations around you could help pitch in. It might be a good time to make some friends with your neighbors and see who can safely help if an emergency does come along. And that could be something to build into your emergency planning. So, if you've got other nearby museums, it might be that you can call on them to help you as well. And that can go for, non-heritage organizations as well. But yeah, so just to broaden your contacts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that I worry about, the delay. A lot of things are just taking longer. Like my Amazon shipments are just taking longer.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think, well, the vendors who I'm always making contact with at the beginning of hurricane season either may be overwhelmed, or maybe they're not operating given our current conditions. And at least in the United States, the last chat we just had was with shippers about how are they going to start opening up? What are the procedures they're taking? There's a lot, like you had just mentioned, close contact in the work that we do, especially when it comes to deliveries and pickups and packing of artwork. So being in touch with them and still making sure those relationships are strong, and knowing what their limitations may be, how it may impact you, as well as like what are the things that you need to protect your staff in the current climate that they can either support, or that you can support on their end. Because I just imagine, if something like a hurricane comes through, and I need air conditioned trucks because I need to get my things out of here, it's not safe anymore in our building. Are they going to be available, and are they going to be comfortable coming to me in the event of a disaster, also while dealing with the pandemic? But one of the things I will say in Florida that tends to always happen when a storm comes through, if it doesn't envelop the whole state, like it sometimes does. Usually it'll hit one coast or the other, and oftentimes we communicate with colleagues like, hey, we're fine, what do you need? Do you need professionals? Do you need some type of conservation assistance, salvage assistance, etc.? But that's a wonderful suggestion. All right, are there any more questions we need to tackle, John, or can we wrap it up? I think you're still muted. Sorry.
Sorry, the neighbor is mowing our lawn.
Perfect.
Registrars from home, registrars at home. I think there are no more questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and wrap it up.
All right. Now, Robin, you had mentioned you wanted to touch on something really quick before we closed out.
Yes. So other hat. FAIC is running their May Day, which is part of this hashtag May Day Prep. It is a fun program about saving our heritage. Basically, if you go to the website, I'm going to put in the chat right now, you can enter to win a free gift card from Gaylord. You basically have to show that you've done an activity for May Day, be it you redid your emergency plan, you did something to prep for an emergency. And if you go ahead and fill out the survey, you'll be put in the running for, like I said, 6 gift cards from Gaylord. So, hey, everyone needs supplies. It's a good thing. Thanks to Gaylord for doing that. So yeah, and please do it. Please participate to continue this very important program. So that was it.
Yeah, and we will have a list of resources. We'll link to the collections trust that you both mentioned. We'll link to AIC and FAIC and all the relevant things we chatted today. And of course, we'll link to the Seaward Podcast website as well, so people can check you guys out. So another relevant meaning for May Day as we close out in the museum field is ICOM's International Museum Day. And it's meant to raise awareness of the fact that, quote, museums are an important means of cultural exchange, enrichment of cultures, and development of mutual understanding, cooperation, and peace among peoples, end quote. So you and your institution across the globe can celebrate this endeavor on May 18th at a time when many of us are looking toward the moment when we can safely come together as a community once more. I wanted to call attention to this little glimmer of light helping us to lead us out of the not so hopefully distant future when we can all come together again. So many thanks again to our wonderful guests, Jenny and Kloe from the Seaward Podcast. Remember to check out their show. They begin their 7th season. I can't believe that. And of course, don't forget to download the Arcs Chat podcast when it comes out later in the week. You can find it, of course, on the website and everywhere you get your favorite podcasts. And that's my spiel. That's all I got.
And also stay tuned for all the other Arcs Chat activities we have this month. On May 26th, we're, as many people requested, going to be discussing insurance with our insurance sponsors, both brokers and underwriters. So you don't want to miss that, as well as some other special things. So stay tuned for important announcements. Hopefully they will blow your mind as they blew mine. So, whoa. So yeah, stay tuned.
All right, I think that's it, guys.
Oh,
Great.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe.